What happens when the world collapses quietly, without sirens, without fire, just the slow, suffocating erosion of truth? What if the only person who saw it coming was a woman everyone dismissed, erased, and underestimated? And what if her silence wasn't surrender, but the most dangerous weapon left? Interested in the story? Keep on watching and let me know where you are watching from. I'm your host, Alfred, and today I will be telling you a story about a powerful woman who dismantled global corruption not with armies, but with clarity, precision, and the kind of strength that never asks for permission. The cabin was carved into the side of a cliff where the Icelandic wind never rested, where wolves kept their distance and satellites lost their signal 2 miles out. Inside, every surface was bare except for the glowing edge of a single terminal buried beneath blackout cloth. Lyra Voss stood barefoot on stone floors, a kettle hissing softly in the corner as she read the screen without blinking. It had been 7 years since she last saw that line of code. Her code. A dead man's handshake, activated only if everything else failed. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her fingers hovered over the terminal, then typed a phrase no one alive remembered but her. Sabaline, awaken. The screen responded instantly, confirming what her gut already knew. Someone had accessed the vault, buried in the lowest layer of a Balkan military net. Not with a hack, but with a passphrase, a physical one, the kind only 5 people had ever known. 4 of them were confirmed dead. The 5th, her old mentor, Juno Rass, had vanished 5 years ago, and rumour had it she'd taken her own life to avoid extraction. Lyra didn't believe in suicide. She believed in signals. And this one told her Rass was either reaching out from a grave or about to be shoved into one. Steam hissed as the kettle boiled dry behind her, but Lyra remained still. Everything she had tried to escape, every compromise she refused, every lie she refused to tell, every truth she buried in the dark, was walking toward her again. The world was unraveling, not with the noise of war, but with the precision of rot. Systems were failing, not all at once, not dramatically, but like vertebrae cracking quietly down a spine. She had warned them this would happen. She had begged them not to build truth on automation, not to tie democracy to code. But they labeled her paranoid, difficult, uncooperative. They dismissed her as a woman too emotional to handle field analysis, too cold to handle personnel. She left the agency without a press release, without a ceremony. Just one line in the exit report. Voss refused final debrief. It was true. She didn't want to explain herself. She wanted to disappear, and she had, until now. Her hand reached for the box hidden beneath the hearthstones, wrapped in waxed cloth and coded seals, and pulled out a drive smaller than her thumb. The failsafe. She slotted it into the port, watching as windows opened one by one. Global incident logs, unusual asset movements, surveillance blackouts in Tier 1 cities, and then 3 blinking nodes. Istanbul, Zurich, Rome, each pulsing with silent warnings, waiting for the one person who knew what to do next. Lyra closed the interface and stood. She didn't pack. She didn't call. She took a last look at the mountains she had memorized for years, their silence once a refuge, now irrelevant. Then she pulled on her hooded cloak, fastened the dagger to her thigh, and stepped into the snow as the screen in her cabin blinked off, leaving no trace. Somewhere across the world, panic was beginning to hum. But here, Lyra moved like she was born from the stillness, composed, unreadable, and entirely in control. She boarded no plane. She used no passport. Lyra Voss walked through Reykjavik's frozen alleys like a ghost made flesh, stepping into a cargo vessel bound for the Netherlands under the name of a dead woman who hadn't existed on paper in over a decade. The wind howled around her, but inside her chest the storm was still. She didn't run. She observed. On the ship, she studied patterns, the way the crew moved, who was tense, who was armed, who lingered too long near the unsecured satlines. By the time the vessel docked, she knew who was trustworthy, who was watching her, and who wouldn't make it past the next port. In Amsterdam, the city was jittering beneath its neon calm. Screens were glitching. Surveillance drones hovered too low. People didn't make eye contact. The collapse hadn't fully arrived, but the silence before it had, the kind of hush a system makes when its seams are about to split. She moved through it like a blade through water, unbothered. At a forgotten train station outside Utrecht, she found the first signal, a chalk mark on the back of a rusted bench, 2 intersecting arcs and a diagonal slash. The symbol for dead but listening, Rass's symbol. She waited exactly 19 minutes, then stepped onto a train with no schedule, riding until the forests turned to ash-grey farmland. Her destination wasn't a place. It was a man, Elias Marek, former cryptographer, former traitor, former friend. He owed her more than blood, more than silence. In a war they both lost, she had been the only one to shield his daughter from what came next. When he opened the door, he didn't ask questions. He looked at her the way soldiers look at loaded weapons, with awe, with fear, with the knowledge that proximity could mean salvation or annihilation. "You saw the signal?" he asked. She nodded. "How many access keys are still live?" she asked in return. He hesitated. 3. 2 are compromised. 1 is clean. Mine. And the others? London, burned. New York, gone dark 2 days ago. Last trace showed activity under a false protocol. Echelon 0. That name didn't belong in any file. That was the Ghost program. The insurance policy built in the basement of every intelligence agency, so deeply buried not even presidents could revoke it. And if someone had activated it, it meant this wasn't sabotage. It was orchestration. Lyra looked up. "Get your daughter somewhere cold. Disappear. And if you hear anything about a woman called Harrow, send word." He froze. "Harrow's dead." "Then someone's wearing her skin," Lyra replied. With that, she walked into the dark again, her cloak blending with the mist, her mind building a map from whispers. Rome was next. Not for answers, but for leverage. If the empire was rotting, she'd need a knife to cut through the infection. And Lyra Voss had never missed a target. Not because she was the fastest or the strongest, but because she never announced she was coming. She was the sound beneath silence. Rome burned quietly. Not in flames, but in failure. The screens still blinked in train stations, the markets still bustled, and the tourists still wandered. But underneath it all, there was a hum of power shifting, of lines being crossed, of people watching who shouldn't be. Lyra stepped off the midnight train in Trastevere with a scarf wrapped around her face and eyes that missed nothing. She moved like someone who had memorized the anatomy of cities, slipping into alleys where security feeds couldn't reach, pacing her footsteps to avoid triggering motion sensors embedded in cobblestones. She wasn't here to make contact. She was here to listen, and Rome spoke in silence. The Widow Protocol was a failsafe buried in myth, known only to 6 women, now only 1. Created in the last years of the covert cyber intelligence war, it wasn't a program or a person, but a chain of encrypted dead drops hidden across Europe. Lyra had written most of it, trained the operatives, and then disappeared before it could be used. But now someone was using it, wrongly. When she reached the old basilica near the Tiber, she found the first node, a hollow brick 2 stories above the altar, reachable only by climbing the forgotten scaffolding that had never been removed after the last restoration. Inside, she found the silver capsule, a drive, antique by current standards, but untraceable. It clicked open with the pressure of her thumbprint and pulse coded to her heartbeat. The message was brief. Trust no eyes. 3 contacts burned. Vienna node dead. Child cipher awake. Await signal from matriarch. She exhaled slowly. The matriarch code hadn't been activated in 12 years because she was the matriarch. Someone was impersonating her, or worse, trying to hijack her network. She slipped the drive into her belt, exited the basilica through a collapsed sewer line, and emerged in the shadow of the Palatine ruins just before dawn. She needed one more confirmation before she struck. In the hills outside Ostia, a woman named Noor lived in a fortified vineyard. A retired strategist, blind from a failed assassination attempt. She hadn't spoken to Lyra since the Zurich disaster, but Noor had a mind like obsidian, sharp, silent, unbreakable. And if anyone could verify the matriarch breach, it was her. When Lyra arrived, the dogs didn't bark. Noor opened the gate herself, bare feet on stone, hands weathered but steady. "You look older," she said flatly. "You look like someone who knows what I came for," Lyra replied. They sat across a table made of cold steel, and Lyra laid out the capsule. Noor's fingers traced its ridges. "It's yours, but the pulse signature has been cloned. Sloppy, but dangerous." "How many days before the system believes the imposter is real?" Lyra asked. 3. After that, your name becomes a liability." "Then I have 2 days to erase her." Noor smiled faintly. "Erase her or become louder?" Lyra's eyes sharpened. "You know me better than that." Noor poured wine into a chipped glass. "No, I don't. That's what makes you terrifying." As dusk bled across the vineyard, Lyra stood to leave. Noor touched her arm just once. "The last widow who turned on the system disappeared." "I didn't vanish," Lyra whispered. "I evolved." She left without looking back, her boots silent on the gravel, her mind already calculating the 3 cities she'd have to cross next. The widow protocol wasn't broken. It was being rewritten, and she was the only one who remembered. The original script. Berlin was first. Cold and sharp, like the steel Lyra carried beneath her coat, it met her with drones that hummed over traffic and metro lines full of citizens who looked without seeing. The imposter had left a signature here, a public key stamped onto a message board in a disused metro station beneath Alexanderplatz. The code was elegant but hollow, a mimic of Lyra's architecture. She sat on a bench in the shadows, hoodie drawn low, tapping through the layers of encryption on a handheld device older than most of the agents still in the field. The key fractured under her touch, revealing a breadcrumb trail meant to lure. But what disturbed her wasn't the message. It was the name used to sign it, Lyra Voss. Bold, public, reckless. Whoever was behind this wasn't just impersonating her, they were burning the anonymity she spent years building. And that meant they wanted her found. The second city was Marseille, where ocean winds tangled with whispers in backrooms and coded phrases exchanged in bakeries with bulletproof glass. Here she met an old runner named Simone, who once ferried messages for her during the Odessa years. Simone had lost 2 fingers since then and didn't ask questions. She passed Lyra a sealed packet with trembling hands. Inside was a list of names. Targets marked for digital erasure, social credit destroyed, location pinged for disappearance. 5 of them were Lyra's former contacts. 2 were already dead. The imposter was using her signature to activate sleeper algorithms buried deep in the old world security networks, turning every shadow she had trusted into a coffin. Lyra stood on the balcony of the crumbling tenement that night and stared at the sea. She didn't weep. She rarely blinked. But for a long moment she allowed the quiet ache of betrayal to echo inside her before sealing it behind her ribs like a steel vault. She had made peace long ago that no one would remember her name. But this was desecration. The third city was Prague, and it bled memory. Here, in the underground vaults of a library that never appeared on maps, was the original widow logbook. Handwritten, burned into steel pages by a code-laced stylus, each one bearing the imprint of the real network's creators. She hadn't touched the book since she left, but when she opened the hatch beneath the statue of Jan Hus and climbed into the dust-choked silence, she knew someone else had. The last page bore a new symbol, the mark of the Vesper Initiative. She stared at the black ink, simple yet brutal. They weren't just hijacking her network. They were trying to erase the entire idea of the Widow Protocol and replace it with something louder, flashier, male-led. Vesper had always wanted the tools she designed, but not the woman who built them. And now they had stolen the legacy without ever admitting she was the source. Lyra set the book down with reverence. Then she took out a blade and carved one new word into the steel plate below it. Seen. It wasn't vengeance that moved her. It was something colder, older. The certainty that a lie repeated long enough becomes history, unless someone burns the ink and writes it again with blood. As she sealed the vault behind her, she activated a silent beacon, one no system could detect. It pulsed once, and somewhere in the world, 6 dormant widow agents received the signal. The matriarch was awake. The first to respond was Aya, deep in the Venezuelan jungle, buried beneath layers of false identities and radio silence. The second was Farah, buried in Istanbul's winding underworld, running a children's shelter behind a front that doubled as a code repository. By the time Lyra landed in Lisbon, all 6 had sent the same confirmation. Awake. She stood at the port, watching cargo ships disappear into the Atlantic fog, her coat heavy with rain and silence. The storm was moving faster than she expected. Vesper's initiative wasn't just hijacking widow systems. They were rewriting the digital DNA of governments, entire networks folding under their architecture. What disturbed Lyra most was how quickly the world adapted to the illusion. Governments surrendered their autonomy to security software laced with buried control codes. Populations slept through it, unaware that their choices were already predetermined by an invisible AI framework. She walked through Alfama's alleyways until she reached a wine shop that no longer sold anything but silence. A man waited inside, blind, retired from the Vatican's ghost registry, and the only one who still remembered her voice. She didn't say a word when she walked in. He simply nodded once, reached below the floorboards, and handed her a device sealed in wax and prayers. The Archivum. One of only 2 keys in existence that could decrypt the Vatican's black file archives, surveillance logs, suppressed technologies, and predictive war games never released to the public. Lyra took it and left without looking back. What she needed now wasn't allies, it was leverage. The next contact was not part of Widow. His name was Cade Salix, former Vesper tactician, now exiled and hunted. He'd betrayed them once for his sister's freedom. Lyra found him underground in the ruins of a decommissioned Japanese server city, living off recycled air and intravenous nutrient codes. When he saw her, he didn't flinch. "They said you were dead," he said, voice hoarse from disuse. "They say that a lot," she replied. He unlocked a chest built into the wall and handed her a data plaque. "It's their next move, an upload event. They're calling it Project Herod." She read the files in silence, her pulse steady, her mind already mapping the consequences. Project Herod wasn't about surveillance, it was erasure. Global memory wipes disguised as cloud migrations. Personal histories, biometric signatures, familial lines, all to be rewritten under Vesper's dominion. "They want to become God," Cade muttered. "No," Lyra said softly. "They want to become the only author of the past." That night, she sent a ripple through the dormant Widow comms, coded in a pattern only the original network could decipher. Not a call to arms. A call to truth. Across 6 continents, the signal lit up buried nodes, hidden servers under orphanages, signal towers disguised as minarets, radio bursts from oceanic weather buoys. It wasn't just the widows who responded, it was the forgotten, the discredited, the erased. People who lived in the margins of digital records, ghosts with names. They didn't want war, they wanted their histories back. And Lyra, wrapped in shadow and certainty, stood once again at the center, not as a savior, but as a memory that refused to die. The world had slept too long under noise and distraction. Now came the silence. Now came the reckoning. Lisbon fell first, not to bombs or riots, but to a silent blackout that swept across every city grid, choking firewalls, darkening satellites, and freezing every screen mid-frame. The collapse wasn't loud, it was elegant. Lyra stood in a church's bell tower, watching the sky flicker above the Atlantic. The only thing that moved now were people, not armies, but individuals, untraceable, unregistered, invisible. The widows had awakened, not with war cries, but with codes buried in salt mines and cathedral vaults. Across the globe, as cities braced for foreign threats, the real insurrection came from within, the quiet reboot of stolen truths. Vesper retaliated fast, deploying the Phoenix Protocol, a fail-safe purge triggered by deep-state AI that would sacrifice digital infrastructure in order to rebuild from scratch under their control. Lyra anticipated it. She uploaded the Archivum's payload 2 minutes before the final lock. The Vatican's black files scattered across what remained of the free net. Millions of eyes saw what governments buried. Assassinations greenlit under false flags, manipulated weather wars, entire refugee populations traded for political leverage. The world didn't scream. It paused. For the first time, people didn't look up to their leaders. They looked inward. Vesper issued a global bounty on Lyra Voss, offering sovereignty to any nation who captured her, but no one could, because she no longer existed in their systems. She had deleted herself. The widows followed her lead, each one unregistered, each one alive, only in the spaces no one dared to search. Cade Salix went dark. Farah vanished from Istanbul. Aya's jungle camp turned to ash, but no bodies were found. In the chaos, some tried to build new governments. Others worshipped the algorithms that had once enslaved them. But those who remembered Lyra didn't try to rebuild the old world. They built quiet havens, places where data didn't dictate worth, where names weren't currency, where silence wasn't shame, but strength. In time, the story of Lyra Voss fractured. Some said she died in Lisbon. Others claimed she became a shadow language used by rebels and orphans. But in one corner of what was once Rome, a mural remained untouched through the years. A woman with eyes like stormlight, standing alone on the edge of fire, her mouth closed, her spine unbent. Children would point to it and ask, "Who was she?" And their mothers would answer, "She was the silence before the collapse." No monuments bore her name. No history books gave her credit. But the world she helped create, unmonitored, unowned, unafraid, carried her imprint in every unbroken voice. Lyra never wanted legacy. She wanted truth. And when the noise had eaten everything else, she was the one who walked through the wreckage with her head high, leaving only calm, only clarity, only the unshakable hush of a woman who never once asked permission to be power itself. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story touched you, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us feel a little closer across the miles. Every story finds its home in the hearts of those who need it, and sometimes that's all it takes. If you'd like to hear more stories that lift the spirit and remind us of the quiet miracles around us, feel free to subscribe. We're building something meaningful here, and it means so much to have you along the way. From our hearts to yours, thank you for spending this time with us.